right, well, it looks like we're at the top of the hour. If you want to go ahead and get started, Katrina.
Hi, welcome everyone. It's so nice to have you all here tonight. I'm just here on behalf of the Los Angeles Independent Schools Association. We're so excited to offer this evening with Alisa Evans. Alisa is a national speaker and thinker and doer around financial aid, and she works with schools all over the country and all over the world. She also works with families all over the country and world doing evenings like this and other types of work to really support that whole cycle of financial aid and the mission of financial aid within our independent schools. So on behalf of LAIS, I'm so happy to spend this hour with you, Alisa, and with all of you who have made the time for this. Thank you all for being here and for considering our schools this evening.
Thank you, Katrina, and thank you to the Los Angeles Association of Independent Schools. I have to say that this is such a rarity that an organization is offering it or hosting essentially a night about financial aid, and then to offer us even like a next level deeper dive into the process of financial aid. Because really, it's pretty challenging, and it's not like you can go find a YouTube video or a TikTok video on how to fill out financial aid for the K through 12 world. It's sort of a very uniquely specific thing. My name is Alisa Evans, and I work for a company called Mission Enrollment, and we process about 6,000 financial aid applications a year. We work with about 50 schools across the country currently, and I am actually based in California, so I am your neighbor here, and we're in sort of a windy tunnel right now with all the rain and such. So I first want to just thank you for coming to an event like this tonight, because, you know, it's in between dinner and tubby time. I have two littles, and, you know, I know this is a challenging time of the night. So the commitment that you've made to even show up here tonight, to learn more, to make sure you're completing your forms, I really applaud that. That is really a deeper level of commitment. And I can tell you, as a parent of two independent school kids, my kids go to an independent school here in California. And I can tell you that I don't care where your income is, what income range you live in. This is a sacrifice that parents are making. You're making a choice between spending your money on one thing or another thing. And one of those things is independent education. It takes time and effort. And I can tell you that as a parent for the last 10 years in an independent school, it's something we sacrifice for, but it gives such dividends to us that we have really seen the fruits of that. And it's really kind of amazing to watch your children grow in these communities. The really cool thing about independent schools is they are independent of any sort of third party or federal program. So during COVID, especially, it was so amazing to watch the independent school community just come together, share resources, share the challenges, things we've learned along the way, and they were really able to adapt. And that is very much what you get as being part of an independent school community. So I applaud you for coming tonight. I appreciate that you're even considering an independent education. And certainly I have no dog in this fight because I just look at the folders for schools, but I can tell you certainly as from a parent's perspective, this is money well spent. It is absolutely something you will see not only for the next couple of years or however many years your kids are going to be in school, but again, lifetime long learning. And you'll really see the differences between having a child in one of these amazing independent schools. So tonight we're going to talk through, if you came to the first couple of sessions offered by the association, they talk sort of kind of at a high level, what is financial aid? What does that look like in the K through 12 world? What are some of the things you might need to have in front of you while you're looking at the forms and stuff? I want to give you a little bit deeper of a dive into, more details around this, because I want you to feel very prepared for this. So there is nothing more stressful than your children and your finances. And in an admissions process, we're sort of combining both of them together. So as we start to take this deep dive, I want you to walk away with three things. So if I've done my job, my goal for you guys is, if you're watching it tonight or you're watching this at a later date while you're completing your forms, I want to give you a sense of calmness around this process. We have all just experienced probably the most terrible last couple of years of our lives. Our children have experienced that stress and anxiety. And so I want to give you as much as I can, knowing we're talking about very stressful things, a sense of calmness around this process, sort of preparation and things you can do to be at a much calmer level about what you need and what you need to do. I want to give you clarity around how this even comes to be. What are we looking at? What are the numbers looking at? How does a calculator tell a school what I can afford to pay as a parent? I want to demystify that a little bit more deeply so that you can understand when it's super important to essentially over communicate. So when we say don't overshare, this is not that time. We want you to overshare because we're going to take the narrative, or we're going to take the information that you're telling us, and we're finding ways to turn that into mathematical equations to come up with a kind of a more right number for what's going on. You can't really just use a mathematical equation for humans. So we need that narrative. We need more information from you, particularly with new families, because the schools may not know you yet. They don't know that you own the business down the street that's been sheltered because of COVID. We won't know that information. So most importantly, in your first year is the time to give that sort of extra level of detail. And we're certainly coming off of a massive pandemic, or hopefully coming off of a pandemic. And so tax data from last year, which was really the big COVID year, and this year could be very different. And so it's something we want to give you enough information that you have a sense of clarity around what do I need to give you? How much is enough information to make a good decision? And then if we've done our job here, I want you to walk away with confidence that you can complete these forms. It's going to be okay, and confidence that you are making a great decision for your child's education. No matter where you choose in an independent education, you're going to find the right fit for your child, and it will be a wonderful experience. And the more you do this, the longer you fill out these forms, the easier they become. So, and then by the time your kids go off to college, you're like a financial aid professional. And once you see those forms, you're going to say, oh my gosh, this is so easy comparatively. So let's talk a little bit about that. So if you are totally new to the concept of financial aid and you didn't get a chance to read or come to the first seminar, I want to just do a quick overview again, because I think it sets the table about what kind of more of the deeper stuff we're going to be talking about. So most of us, if we went off to college, our parents filled out the FAFSA, which was, and maybe you have children that are heading off to college and you're starting to complete that form. So our only frame of reference around school financial aid was from the FAFSA. And so we completed that form. There was, there was quite a few questions, but it wasn't nearly as detailed as what is asked in a PK through 12 financial aid application. And there's a pretty distinct reason why. And I want you to know this up front, because I don't want to set you up for failure in what you get for financial aid at the PK through 12 world compared to what you might get offered for college could be very different. So this K through 12 schools are far more generous in financial aid than you will find at the college level. And here's the reason why. So what we're trying to assess in college financial aid is, what is your general capacity to pay? And we can then package you with student loans, with federal loans, with work study, with all these different ways, merit aid, things like that, to come up with a package that we think that you will likely be able to come up with and pay for. And many of those things that you're offered are deferred loans until 6 months after the child gets out of college. So you kind of have time to plan for this. And then the repayment terms are between 10 and 12 and sometimes 20 years. So getting a pretty precise number on what we think you can afford to pay today is not critical in the college financial aid world. So they're not asking us very deep questions, because they're not trying to figure out what you can pay tomorrow. In our world, you are essentially applying for financial aid now, and you're going to start paying within several months. And so we have to do a very thorough job of saying, okay, what is this family's really their, money coming in the house, money going out of the house? What do we think that they can afford to pay right now over perhaps even a 10-month payment plan? But what's reasonable and fair and equitable across all these families for them to be able to pay for this education that they're going to have to pay not just once, but every year for the next, in some cases, not just a couple of years, 10, 12, 13, 14, 15 years. So we're trying to long game this thing and give you as much support as we can over the course of that time. So when we ask a lot of questions, it's not to just be nosy, It's not to try to disqualify you. We are trying to get to a place that says, what does this family's profile look like? What are they spending their money on? What do they have going on that we need to be paying attention to? Do they care for an elderly parent? Okay, that's an additional expense that we wouldn't necessarily know. So we got to ask those types of questions. The college application is not going to really care if you're caring for an elderly parent, because again, they're not really paying as much attention to the being able to pay right now scenario. I wanted to set that table for us to have that conversation, because as you start to go through these forms and you see all the questions that we're asking, it'll be more clear that we're getting quite a bit more detailed, but the purpose is simply to be supportive and come to a good place where we think everybody will be able to contribute, and it'll be fair, and it'll work for you. The good news is that in the LAIS group, they have their applications laid out in such a way, their websites, excuse me, their websites are laid out in such a way that you can very easily navigate. And so we're going to talk about that next, because now you know, here are the differences between higher ed financial aid and the K through 12 world financial aid. Now let's talk about where do you go to learn more about how to fill out these forms. I want you to know this, and you might have learned a little bit about this at the previous presentation, because you need to start making, I don't want to say a matrix, but you want to start writing out the schools you're considering, what financial aid platforms they're using, what are their deadline dates for admission, what are their deadline dates for financial aid, and maybe what are their deadline dates for documents, because that could be a slightly different date, and what documents are they requiring of you. Also, a difference between K through 12 and college is that there is not one financial aid form that you fill out. It's not like the FAFSA, there's only one and everybody uses it. In Los Angeles, there are quite a few financial aid platforms. And so you need to know which one you're supposed to use. And the deadlines are not universal. It's not that everybody has the same deadline for financial aid or the same deadline for admission. So you want to make sure that you're looking at all of the correct deadlines, and you just build your little matrix and see, okay, I'm looking at these 3 schools for my child going into kindergarten. And of these 3 schools, 2 of them are using SSS and 1 of them is using FAST. So what does that mean? That means that I need to complete the SSS application, and the system will send it to the 2 schools. And then I also will need to fill out the FAST application. So that way you have a little sort of breadcrumbs of where to go and what you need to do. And then I'm going to give you sort of a timeline of success, because it is really there is some consistencies across the board. After you have those deadline dates dialed in, there is some consistency. So the last thing I'll say about sort of the 101s of financial aid is that you'll find that not everybody, it's not on here, but not everybody even uses the word financial aid to describe their tuition program, their financial aid program. So you will find that some schools use terms like tuition assistance, index tuition, they'll use the term financial aid. And so when you go to the section that we're going to talk about of where you find what platform they're using, what are the details, you might see that they say tuition assistance instead of the term financial aid. They all are exactly the same concept, in that you are applying for that you can afford X amount of dollars towards your child's education, and you will need some assistance from the school, whatever term they use. The other term you need to know is that when a school gives out a grant in the K through 12 world, with very few exceptions, it is based on the family's mathematical financial need. There is very few opportunities for what we call merit aid. And in fact, Los Angeles, I don't believe even has any, but you might find a special program out there that is on the merits of the child, which would be something like you have the top scholar in the country, or you have the best tuba player, or you have an athlete or something. Those would be grants based on the merits of the child. That is far more common in college. What we're talking about tonight is financially needed grants, meaning I can't afford to pay the full tuition, so I need money I need a grant to be able to cover that difference of what I can afford to pay in the tuition. And that grant is based solely on family's financial need. So the other piece of this is it's not a loan. It's not something you have to pay back. And so that can be confusing at times. So it is not a loan, and it's absolutely something that you do not have to pay back. The school's programs are different in that not everybody has the same financial aid budget, much like colleges. And so there are different, the funding for financial aid comes from within the school community. So schools either are fundraising for financial aid, or they have an endowment for financial aid, but it's usually some percentage of their operating budget that they allocate to tuition assistance or financial aid. And so when we say that we are an independent school, we are truly independent of any federal programs. And so there's no federal plus loans, there's none of that funding that comes to us. So it is truly all for one and one for all. The money that is fundraised for financial aid comes from our own community, or through an endowment program, usually from someone that went to the school years ago. And so it really is meant to be for our community. So that's just important for you to know. We also, sometimes folks will ask about, is it based on your credit? No, we don't care what your credit score is. This is not based on credit. So how do we navigate this? And I mentioned previously that the school's websites are laid out fairly similarly, and that you will always find, and this is important as you're doing your admissions research, what is the right fit for my family? What schools really speak to our values as a family? What schools really are top of mind? I really have heard great things about this school. So when you go to a school's website, the places that you typically go for admissions would say, I want to learn about the academics or the arts or the athletic stuff, depending on what your child's, kind of specialties are or what they're excited about. But every school has an admissions tab. And in that admissions tab, you're going to find out all the information about when your files are due and all that kind of when everything is due for admissions. You'll also find a little thing that'll say either affording, insert school name. So affording the Center for Early Education, or financial aid and tuition for our school. That's where you're going to find the details on what financial aid platform they're using, what system are they using, what are the deadline dates, what documents are they requiring, and usually there's actually a link right to the financial aid platform that they're using. But every school has this kind of laid out the same way. So when you're doing your research, and this is a simultaneous process, so when you're applying for admission, you're also applying for financial aid. And so you don't wait till you get into a school to then say you need financial aid and apply. It's something you're doing at the same time. So like I said, do your little matrix that says, all right, here are the schools we're considering. Go to everybody's admissions tab, go to their affording, insert school name, and look and see what financial aid platform, what are the deadline dates, what are the documents they're requiring. The other important information to consider as we talk about a sense of calmness and affordability, and how do we make this work? If this is your first time or your first experience, even considering an independent education, it can be fairly daunting to think, gosh, these tuitions, it's a sacrifice at every income level. So what you need to do to be really clear about what you can contribute, what do you think is going to be something you're able to afford? It's not ever just tuition, right? We think about, even if our kids are in public school, there are fees that are associated with things. Sometimes they have to pay for trips. There's sometimes testing that they have to pay for. So when you're considering these schools, you also want to say, all right, what are the tuitions that are, what is the tuition for the grade that your child entering? Are there any fees I need to be aware of? Are there any trips that might be required that are not part of the tuition, that are sort of additional? So the 11th graders go to Mount Baldy, or whatever it might be, assuming people are back to traveling again with COVID. But if there's class trips that are required but not covered, and that's going to be an expense of your family. If you have children that are in high school that are going to be heading off to college pretty soon, the cost of admissions, admissions entrance forms for college are very expensive. You start applying to 3 and 4 colleges, those add up. The cost of testing. So if you got to take tests that are a cost associated with that. So when you're doing your budgets and you're sort of thinking through the different schools, making sure you have a really clear picture on all that's included or not included, and those additional costs that are going to be kind of coming through. So the financial aid systems that you're going to find in the Los Angeles area is really kind of all of them, but you've got TADS, which is, and again, every financial aid platform is good. they all do the same thing. Their goal is to come up with a reasonable amount of money that a family can contribute to non-public education. They might ask slightly different questions. They might include one thing or slightly include something different, or some do calculations a little bit differently. But at the end of the day, they're all kind of similar. The reason a school uses TADS versus SSS versus FACTS versus FAST or Blackbaud is really, in some cases, a comfort level. So the person that does financial aid has been doing it through FAST forever, so they feel comfortable using that platform. Or they're using FACTS for financial aid because they use FACTS for tuition and billing, and it's easier to just kind of send the data, and it's easier for parents. So they're all good. There's no one that's better than the other. They're all perfectly sufficient to doing the job that's required. But as a family, you just need to know that it's not just one application that you can send to all the schools. You can only send the application to schools that are using SSS. You can send the SSS application, but you can't send your SSS application to a school that's using a different system. So, that's going to be a cost you need to think about. So it's going to be, you want to find out which systems are being used at what schools. Really important. So when you do click on that financial aid form, the financial aid tab, when you click on that financial aid tab, no matter what school you're thinking about, what you're going to find is pretty common, right? So first, there might be some information about their philosophy. Here's how we feel about financial aid. Here is our commitments. We use financial aid to either increase socioeconomic diversity, or we're trying to support our local community. And they'll typically talk about, who can qualify for aid. Some schools don't offer financial aid at the pre-K level, but they do once they start in kinder or first grade. So they give a little bit of detail around their program. And then they're going to get into, here's the financial aid platform that we are using. And then they'll start to talk through timelines. So most school websites are very much the same. They kind of are very similar. So I just took a screenshot of a school that just happens to use SSS. So you're looking at what I told you to gather, right? What is the deadline date? Well, the deadline date, you see the deadline date here. It tells you if you had started this process a couple months ago, starting in September, you could have started your application. But the deadline for sure for this school is listed on here. And then usually you'll find the initial deadline to complete the application. So whatever application, and then they'll typically give you what's required kind of out of the gates, what documents are required. And that usually is prior year tax returns. So in this case, prior year tax returns would be your 2020 tax returns. And then maybe a year-end paycheck stub to see how different, well, because of COVID, certainly how different 2020 was from 2021. So they can kind of look at that stuff. They'll usually give you their school code, no matter what system they're using. And oftentimes they'll give you links to be able to access that financial aid platform. And then you'll often find another deadline date. So here's the date to apply. And then here's a second deadline date. And that's for you to upload your current tax returns. Now, I know this feels challenging at times to parents to say, how can we possibly get our 2021 taxes done by February 21st or, by February 18th or the 15th? We understand that this is challenging, but here's why. If we were to do this work and base it on prior year taxes, and lots of things have changed, particularly with COVID, and we do this work without looking at current taxes, we either have two choices. We're either going to give you an award based on old tax data, which could be very different than what is actually happening now, and then offer you something totally different 5 months from now when your taxes come in. Or by getting the current year taxes earlier, we are able to do a far more accurate assessment of what your capacity to pay is. And we can then give you an admissions offer with financial aid information so that you're not having to make a decision about which school your child's going to go to and have no idea what you're going to pay. So by getting this information early, the school can actually do their work to come up with a financial aid award and then be able to give you that in March, when the financial aid, when the general deadline is for schools to send out the admissions offers. So it is not to be challenging. It's not to make it difficult for you. It is there so that when you get your admissions offer, you've got a full picture of what you're being offered and what you're being expected to contribute. Okay. So part of this calmness, and I would say, I know it's December at this point, so obviously a lot of you are sort of in the application process at this point, but I really think it is so critically important that you do a budget before you really deeply dive into doing the financial aid forms and all that kind of stuff. There is a method to my madness. If you do a budget and you pull data out from your bank accounts, like, so what I typically do, the way my husband and I made able to make this work is every year we pull a budget together to make sure that we can still afford the tuition and that, you know, our finances where we think they are. We will usually take 2 months that are sort of mundane months that don't have massive things like holiday expenses in there. So we'll take, you know, maybe September and October, and we'll say, all right, what are we spending for utilities, gas, groceries, all that stuff? What I have learned over the course of being an independent school parent for many years now, the first 1 or 2 years that I was trying to make a budget to like make sure I built in the tuition that we had to pay, I would make estimates on groceries, for example, and then find out that I was wildly off, and mostly because I hadn't considered the amount of times I go to Target or I go to Costco. And so when I do my estimates in my head, I'm like, oh, I probably spend, I don't know, $1,000 a month on groceries. I go to Stater Brothers and Gerard's and all the, you know, like Trader Joe's. Okay. But what you don't remember, or I don't remember, is I also love to go to Target and I'll buy groceries there, or I'll buy every miscellaneous item I can think of. So using your actual bank statements to put like an average budget together will give you a far more accurate picture of your sort of financial state of affairs. Doing that work now, which in some ways has almost nothing to do with applying for financial aid, other than to suggest if you don't have a clear picture about what you think you can afford to pay, then you might make an offer that is wildly off. And you don't realize that you also do the Target thing like I do, my little sanctuary in Target, and you are off. And then they say, okay, well, you said you could afford to pay $20,000 a year, but you were 20% off in all of your expenses, and you really don't have that enough money to pay that every year. And then all of a sudden something happens and you got to pay for some additional thing, or something breaks down or what have you. So this is a long game. So doing your budgets, I think annually would be amazing. But even just as you're first getting into this, to say, you know, what does our financials look like? What is reasonable? What is affordable to us? And I just threw up NerdWallet. They've got some great articles and stuff, but there are lots of budgeting tools out there. It doesn't even have to be fancy. It just has to be sort of your average expenses of the things that you typically spend on. So doing that work will also help you when you're filling out these forms, because some of the applications do ask about monthly expenses. Monthly, what are you spending on groceries? So what if you did say, I'm spending $800 a month on groceries, but in reality, you're spending, you know, $2,000 a month, you know, whatever it might be, you don't want to be off completely. So by doing this work as sort of your first baseline thing, you're going to have all the documents you need, because you're going to have all the data, and you're going to have all that kind of pulled together, that by the time you go into the application to start completing these forms, you should have most of what you would be asked on any of these applications. So it's just a good practice. Before you complete the forms, the other thing I try to recommend families do is that, like, our house is too small to have lots of things hanging around. So I have a storage unit, and once we're done with our taxes and we've done what we need to do, just like everything, it goes to the storage unit. And so what goes to the storage unit, it goes to the abyss of the storage unit, and trying to find things after they have gone to the storage unit can be challenging. So if you are like me and your tax returns go to the storage unit, what you don't want to do is wait till 2 days before the deadline, and for some reason the storage unit is closed and you can't access your documents. That is going to just create unnecessary stress for you. So going and getting your 2020 tax returns, which is last year's tax returns, and as you're eventually going to need the 2021s. And then if you own a business, getting your 2020 business taxes, your K-1s if you're a business owner. If you're a person that just works for an organization, your W-2s, not just one W-2, but all of the W-2s. Having that information in front of you when you're getting ready to fill out these forms is going to be really useful and really helpful for you. Plus, you have to upload them in the system anyway. So having them in front of you while you're doing this just gets you through this process completely. Making sure you do not have password protected documents. That is probably, I would say, of the 6,000 folders we review in a year, 30% of them, families upload taxes that are password protected. And the reason happens is that when you get your tax return from your accountant, they'll say, okay, Joanne, we filed your taxes. The code to open this up is a combination of your social security number and your zip code or something. You open up the taxes with the password protection is unprotected. Then you can look at it at your computer. But the minute you do something with that document, the password goes back on again. You might not realize that. So just a tip, if you do have password protected documents, typically that come from your accountant, you need to make sure that those are unprotected before you upload those into any system. And I would highly recommend reaching out to your accountant now before the first of the year filings and all that stuff they get super busy. Reaching out to them now to make sure you have those documents not protected. So this is the timeline, right? So before you do anything, you're going to make your budget. Great. Get that out of the way. Sit down on a Saturday, cup of coffee, just get that done. And then as a family, really thinking through what are the schools we're considering? What do we think is reasonable and fair? And doing that work now, right? You don't have a ton of time, but over the holiday break, that's a great time. If you've got some quiet time to sit down and really work through these things as you're going through it. So we are really at the point of, it's fall has come and gone. In COVID, everything goes 150 miles an hour. So it was September. It is now December somehow magically. So we are now in December. So at this point, you're going to start coming up against when the financial aid applications are due and your admissions applications are due. So now is the time to start preparing for that. And if you have time during the break, that is the time to definitely do it. Early winter, that's when all the schools will be very much in alignment that say, okay, we need your application and your tax returns need to come in. Then they're going to do all of their work. They're going to do all of their assessments. They may reach out for additional documentation or they might have questions. So kind of be prepared for that. And then you're going to find that they have the returning kids get their awards. So once you're a returning family, you usually know what you're going to be paying by the time you're doing re-enrollment. And your deadlines tend to be a little bit sooner than as new families. So something to be prepared for. So the school deals with all the returning families. They get all the awards out for returning families with their re-enrollment contracts. And then they're doing all their admissions meetings and interviews and all that kind of stuff. By early spring, and it's usually around March 10th-ish. I don't know what the date is for LAIS, but it's usually like March, very early March. The schools then have all of their kids, who they're going to be offering admission to, and what is the recommended award or what we consider that they can afford to pay for the school. Once that happens, then you're going to get the number, you're going to get all your offers, and then you're going to decide what school you're going to pick and where you're going to go. And then you sign your enrollment contract. Then you can take that number, say, okay, they're asking us to pay $10,000. Okay, great. I'm going to do the 10-month plan. And that plan will usually go into play May, June timeframe. It just depends on the school. So now you have basically from March, April till June to get your budget in order and say, okay, budgeting, I have to be able to start making these payments in June. So looking at your budget, now you know the actual number, pop that back in and say, okay, are there things we need to adjust and adapt? My husband, I constantly am saying to him, do we really need Hulu, Netflix, Disney Plus, Paramount Plus, every plus you can imagine? I'm like a classic victim of filling out you want it free for a month, and then they charge me for 9 months and I forget I didn't cancel. And so looking at those expenses on an annual basis will help you to kind of plot out your budget for the next year. And then come the fall, you're going to go rinse and repeat, and you'll go through this process again. It'll certainly be much easier. Like I said, when you've already filled out these forms, you will go back into the same form as a returning family, and about 5 or 6 questions are already answered. You'll have already answered the questions about who the people are in the house, what are the addresses, the children's information, their date of births, all that stuff will already be pre-filled in. So all you'll need to do at that point is to do the document, making sure you have your documents, your updated documents, any changes in income, those kinds of things. And that's what you'll just get into a groove of doing that every year. All right, so I wanted to give you clarity, sort of the magic. What is the magic behind the calculation? So my company works in all of the financial aid applications. And I told you they live in very similar, they come up with very, pretty consistent, similar numbers. Their goal is simple. The goal is to find out what is a reasonable amount of money a family can contribute to non-public education, knowing full well that there are lots of expenses that people feel differently about what is considered affordable, what is considered a core expense of my life versus discretionary. You may feel like Starbucks is absolutely something I need to do every day, and I may feel like I can just use the Keurig. That's on a very simplified level. This is obviously far more complex than that, but how people spend their money, we have almost no control over. So we build these calculators to come up with a fair and sort of consistent way to assess capacity to pay. So I know in the other sessions, we've kind of talked about what goes into the calculations and stuff. The only reason I give you sort of these highlighted areas is, one, it is critically important for you to share information if things have changed in your life. Most people, whether you make $80,000 or $300,000, most people are operating paycheck to paycheck. And they're operating from the income coming in their house, and they have their expenses coming out, and they're looking at things from sort of a monthly perspective. And so what the main components of any of these calculators is saying, obviously money coming into the house minus expenses that go out of the house and things that you really have no control over. You have no control over having to pay taxes, federal, state taxes. So you've got taxes, you have insurance, you've got housing, you've got clothing, you've got food, you've got commuting costs. You've got all these expenses that are sort of part of your everyday, regardless of where your child goes to school. So then once we've assessed that and you've given us all that information, then we say, okay, we have what's called discretionary monies. And it doesn't mean that you just have extra money floating around. We're saying what's left over, then you have choices of what else you spend your money on. Do you put your money towards a bigger house, more expensive cars, or is it really important for you to put money into the savings account, or you're putting money into retirement, you're putting money into investments or rental properties, whatever you're spending your money on, those are additional expenses that you have that you sort of have more control over what you spend. One of those expenses that you would have control over is paying for your child to go to a non-public education, right? So our goal is to come up with a fair and reasonable ask to say, of your monies that you can spend on lots of different things, what is fair and reasonable to ask you to contribute of all this leftover stuff to non-public education? And that's really what we're doing here. When we look at assets, we're looking at families that own homes versus families that are renting, families that have money in the bank and they have investments and they have rental properties and they have all this kind of other stuff going on, have more financial strength than a family that's renting and doesn't have any money in the bank and they're basically just living off the money coming into the house. So we meet people where they are at. And so we do the assessments based on that information. And then two families that look exactly the same profile, everything about them, but they have a family of 4 versus a family of 5, the calculation is going to render a different number because that household size is larger. There's more protection for expenses and things like that. So when someone just says to me, well, how much, do I need to earn to be able to afford this? Like, what do I need to earn to get financial aid? The answer is really, it depends. There's a matrix of information behind here that gives you information to kind of fill out these forms. But then there is a massive amount of work that happens on the school's part to make sure they're accounting for things in the best way possible. So it's a lot. There's a lot that goes into this. It's not simply just, everybody goes down the same tube and everybody comes out with the same amount that they're going to be required to pay. We do look deeply at those things that you say. So if you're caring for an elderly parent and that's costing you $10,000 a year, we need to know about that so we can make an accounting of that. So I just want to talk now just about, this is certainly not meant to be accounting 101, but you're going to get really familiar with your tax returns as you start to complete these forms. So I want you to be well prepared when you see things like, what is your W-2 earnings and what is, do you have any businesses or trusts or real rental property? So I want to just give you sort of a lay of the land. So we're going to transition into more the fundamentals of filling out these forms. So at the end of the day, the first thing we're going to be looking at is we want you to have your complete tax return in front of you. So right now, everybody has their 2020 tax returns is the only ones that everybody has right now. Nobody has 2021 taxes at this point. So as you're filling out any of these forms, it's going to say to you, what happened in 2021? And you're going to say, Alisa, I don't know. I don't have my 2021 tax return yet. Using your taxes, your 2020s as a guide is going to help you complete these forms. If 2020 was a crazy COVID year for you, you were furloughed half the year, and 2021 is a much different picture, then you're going to really be using more estimates. But I want you to be aware of what tax returns you can go to get good estimates for the information that's being asked of you. So your 1040 is your tax return that everybody gets every year. The W-2 are for those that work for an organization that gives them a paycheck. So at the end of the year, everybody gets a W-2. If you work in multiple businesses or you work for multiple companies, you might have multiple W-2s. So essentially salaried or working folks will get either salaried or hourly will get a W-2 at the end of the year. Not at the end of the year. They'll get it usually at the end of January. Schedule 1, that is sort of a key form that says, okay, here is your normal, like everyday earnings. And the Schedule 1 will tell you and let you know that you actually have different other types of earnings. You know, you might have had unemployment this year. You might have had business income. You might have had capital gains. There's lots of things that appear on that Schedule 1 that you're going to use as an indication of questions that are going to be asked of you to say, oh, wait, do I get out? Well, you'd know if you get alimony, but am I getting alimony? Am I getting, all those kinds of things are going to be outlined on your Schedule 1. We're going to take a look at one. So you don't have to kind of conceptualize it. I'm going to show you it. The Schedule C is sort of for those that, there's a lot of folks right in these last 2 years that were Uber drivers. And now once Uber sort of closed down with all the COVID stuff, they transitioned to being DoorDash, and they were doing Instacart and Shipt and all these organizations. Those families, or those of you that are doing something like that, they will typically fill out what's called a Schedule C, that you have your own little small business, but you're not organized as like a corporation or anything like that. The Schedule E are for those that fall into one or all of these categories. Either you have a business that's in the form of a corporation, or you're part of a corporation, or if you have rental property or properties, or you have trust and estate that you have taking distributions from. So you would have what's called a Schedule E. And if you have a corporation, or if you have an S Corp or a partnership that you're a part of, or multiple ones, you are going to have corporate tax returns that are called 1120s. And if you have a partnership, it's going to be called a 1065. Both of those corporations give you what's called a K-1, which is in some ways the equivalent of your W-2. Not that it's not directly that way, but thinking of it as for every business that I am participating or I am part of that shows up on my Schedule E, I should have a corresponding K-1. All right. So maybe I lied. We are doing a little bit of accounting 101. So the next group we're going to talk through, this is sort of I would say the most, commonly used things. Lots of people have W-2s. So what I wanted to give you is just a lay of the land. So when you use any of these applications, if you get into trouble and you don't know where to look for something, you don't have to guess. They all have call centers. All the financial aid platforms have call centers. The schools are paying good money to these financial aid platforms for them to be able to be here to serve you and support you. So if you don't know and the little think bubbles don't give you enough information, do not worry and don't feel bad or worry about it. Call the call center. Say, listen, I don't know where I'm supposed to find wages, tips, and other compensation. I don't know where that lives. And maybe you're not quite understanding what that information is. Reach out to them. That's what they are there for. So we're going to just talk through sort of the most common questions that you're going to be asked. The first question you're going to be asked is, mom and dad or dad and dad, what was your wages and tips all in, not just from one W-2, but all of your W-2s from 2020, or in this case, now it'll be 2021. So you're going to use maybe your 2020, if you're filling it out right now, as a guide, just as a, kind of an estimate. And you're going to look at box number 1. So wages always lives in box number 1. And here's a box number 1. So in 2020, this person made $74,197 for this W-2. They will often ask about what did you pay for Social Security, for Medicare. All of those things have corresponding numbers on your W-2. They'll also ask about what are you contributing to your retirement plan, or you have a cafeteria plan, or whatever plans that you have. They will ask you, are you contributing? Most importantly, are you contributing to retirement? And those all live, the information on that lives in box number 12. And we've listed here for you the corresponding letters. So the single letters are your contribution, and the double letters are the employer's contribution. So if you contribute $5,000 to your retirement plan and your company matches you, they will also have a similar amount under DD, or like their contribution. So they're going to ask questions there as in the universal, any financial aid platform you're filling out. So this is what your W-2 looks like. And these are the corresponding areas that you're going to be asked questions about. The next common form is sort of on the first page of your tax return. I'm just going to give you a quick lay of the land. So what you see in box number 1 here is what we talked about above, which was one person's W-2 was, say, 70,000, and then you have a spouse that has another W-2 that's 40 or 50,000. What appears on box number 1 is actually the total of your household combined W-2 wages. So if the question is on the application, how much did you earn in W-2 wages as a family, then you can just go to box number 1, and that's going to give you the total. If it asks how much money did mom make, and you're going to have to put your individual from your W-2 what that number is, because this is the collective of all of them in your household. The rest of the information is we're talking about whether or not you got interest or you've got dividends. So you'll have numbers here if you got interest and dividends. If you took an IRA distribution, that would show up here. So if you had to liquidate maybe retirement for some reason, and you had to pay taxes on it, that would appear here. If you have a pension or annuity that you are getting, that will show up here. If you had any capital gains or losses, that will appear here. You'll see that a lot of these, even though it feels complicated, the tax return is pretty much reflective of what the question would be. So the question might be, did you get any Social Security benefits? And if you look by Social Security benefits and there's nothing here, then you didn't have taxable benefits there. So it is really built so that if you have your tax return in front of you, it should help you fill out this form. So the big, probably the most confusing one here is, what about if you have other income from other sources instead of just having a W-2? So that's where we're going to go to next, because that's really where kind of the rubber hits the road. So I'm going to take you to that next. So it's called a Schedule 1. So you have your 1040, you have your page 1 there and 2, kind of the back page. And then you have what's called a Schedule 1. And the part 1 of your Schedule 1, let me move my face out of the way here so you can see it, is all of the things that make up the number that we just looked at that says, go to Schedule 1, line number 9, which is adding up or subtracting everything that was 1 through 8. This number is the number that shows up on that first page of your tax return. So if the question is, what were your W-2 earnings? And you have that number, and it says, did you earn any income from real estate, partnerships, corporations, what have you? Then you can say, yes, I did. See, it says I earned $157,000 from that. And so then you're gonna be able to answer that question because you know what it is. It's listed right here. If you got unemployment compensation, you're gonna see that listed right here. So if it asked you, did you have any unemployment? Now, if you didn't have any unemployment in 2021 and you did have unemployment in 2020, then you're gonna put 0 there because it's no longer applicable. So again, you're always using your 2020 tax returns right now as a guide to completing this form. These are all the different questions that you're typically asked in an application. And I kind of itemize out for you the corresponding line items on a Schedule 1. So this is being recorded, so you don't have to feverishly take notes here. but it's listed here. This is your secret decoder ring. So when you get asked the question, you know, what was your profit and loss from your business or your farm or what have you, you can say, I know where to go to look for that. So you're going to have that information there for you. So what do we do if your income has changed? And that's a big one. Wait, what if my income has changed? And many people, certainly in Los Angeles, were deeply furloughed from, you know, the time COVID hit really badly for us in, say, March. And we were pretty well furloughed until September, October, depending on what industry you were in. And so 2020 could look very different than what 2021 looks like. And so when that is your situation, what are you supposed to do? So I told you the one thing is, don't get so bogged down by, I want to have the exact number in the exact spot. You know, this is just using it as a guide, and we're using estimates and things like that. So if it is very different from 2020 to 2021, one thing you can do is get a copy of your last paycheck stub. It is almost the end of the calendar year at this point, that it's pretty close to what you're going to see on your W-2, because it's almost like your last paycheck stub. So, you know, your last paycheck of the year. So you can use your last paycheck stub. So instead of using your W-2, you can look at the last paycheck stub if things have changed pretty dramatically and use that for an estimate. If you own a business and 2020 was a terrible year for you, and in 2021, you're in sort of a recovery time, looking at your profit and loss statement to say, okay, where are we at now as compared to 2020? And then pulling up your balance sheet for looking at your assets and debts as they stand kind of right now, if they're pretty different from what happened in 2020. I'm going to take, you know, I'm just going to go through a couple more of these, you know, kind of avoiding the traffic jams. One of the things, just be cautious of, don't double enter your income for your business. So we talked about where W-2 income is, and W-2 income and profit from a business are different things, and making sure you're looking at your tax returns more completely so that you don't say you just get a Schedule C and you earn $50,000 from that Schedule C, but you don't get a W-2. Don't put $50,000 in the W-2 section and then again profit from business $50,000. The system will double count that stuff. So really pay attention if you are a business owner. There is really, I would say, there are more questions and there's more complexity with business owners. So take that time, because you're going to have to fill this out for, like, you're going to have to fill in the details for each of your businesses if you have multiple businesses. Making sure you overshare. I cannot stress this enough. Leaving good notes makes the job of the folder review person so much better, and they can take your narrative and turn that into mathematical equations to make adjustments and changes to the calculation. And if you have done the job of doing the budgeting before you do all of this, when you get to the question that says, okay, how much do you think you can afford to pay? You're not going to be seeing it for the first time and thinking at this moment in time, like, oh, I don't know, let me just throw a number out there. You don't ever want to throw a number out there. You really want to think this through. And so you don't want to put zero unless you truly have absolutely no ability to pay tuition, because everybody contributes something towards independent education. And so being honest in what you think you can afford to pay is really critically important. The schools appreciate that. And for some reason, people sometimes put the full tuition in there. Pay attention to the question that's asking you, what do you think you can afford to pay? Not what do you think the tuition is? If you're remarried, most systems in every school requires that both of you are on your application. If you are remarried, because we are looking at household income, we're looking at household expenses. And if you are remarried, you have money coming into the household and expenses going out of the household that are reflective of a married household. And so we need that person on the application, even if that person is not giving financial support to your child. We will have the biological parent B completing their own application. And if they are remarried, they would put their new spouse. The information never crosses over. You're not seeing their information. They're not seeing your information. And so you can safely fill out that form. And like I said, this is not a, use your taxes as a guide, but know that there is no right answer to every question, because essentially what you're giving us, when you're going to be paying us, is in the future. And so we're doing our best estimating here to come up with something that's fair and reasonable. I'm going to just go over one or two of these, and then I want to open it up to questions here. So will applying for financial aid hurt my chances of getting into a school? I would say that is probably the #1 question I get from families. And I'm going to tell you this. If you don't apply for financial aid and you need it, and your child gets into the school you want to get into as a full pay family, I can assure you it probably had nothing to do with whether or not you applied for financial aid. It's not going to give you some sort of massive edge. If your child's mission appropriate, they are the right fit for the school, and the school has the space for you, they are going to make that the priority of whether or not your child gets in. If you don't apply for financial aid and you need it, what are you going to do if you say, oh, sorry, just kidding, I really do need financial aid? By the time the admissions has come out, they've already done their awarding, they've already used their budgeting for their new families. There really is no budget left for people that come back after the fact and say, oh, just kidding, I really do need financial aid. So, and if you just try to make it work for 1 year, and then you're going to need this to work for many years ahead. So if you need financial aid, don't not apply because you think somehow you're going to have some sort of an edge above the guy next to you that is applying for financial aid, because the schools really need transparency here. They need to know what your ability to pay is once we get to the place of budgeting and making sure we're doing awards. So please, 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 if you think you can afford to make this work full price, you go for it. If you think that you will not be able to afford this, not just 1 year, but all these years you're going to be in this educational program, then you should apply for financial aid. The last thing I'll talk about is stay-at-home parents, because this is another really important question. When you, so the expectation is that both parents are working, but if you are a stay-at-home parent for reasons that are very specific, the system will actually not, we basically will add income to non-working spouses under some very specific conditions. And so we make the requirement that both parents would be working, reasonably working as best they can. And if someone is choosing to stay home and they don't qualify for an exception, then we're going to add back income to the tune of minimum wage for a year. And that way it's fair and equitable to all families that both parents are working and such. However, there are exceptions to that rule. The exception would be this. A parent is staying home and not working because they're actually caring for an elderly parent of theirs, or they have a disabled child at home that they're caring for. That is their job. They're caring for that disabled child or a disabled adult in the household. Or they just had a child and that child is not school aged yet. And so in a lot of cases, it's actually cheaper to stay home than it is to go back to work and have your child in daycare. And so those are really the criteria for us to not add income to a non-working spouse. The other exception right now would be is if you just lost your job, that you clearly are not, you're not making the decision to be a stay-at-home parent. You've just lost your job and you're in the job hunt. The reason I'm telling you this about the expectations and the exceptions is that when I told you it's so important to overshare, this is a great example of why. Because if we know the reasons why you're a stay-at-home parent, and if it has nothing to do with, just making the decision as a family to have one parent stay home, then we can choose, we can know what to do here. And there's reasons why we would add income or not. So making sure you're giving us that information, we can kind of do that work for you. And last but not least, you do have to apply every year, of course. So you're going to get better at this. It's going to be something that you're going to get through it. And hopefully now you've got a better sense of what are your to-dos, what are the documents looking like, what should we be preparing for and getting ready for. And I know that was a lot of information in a short period of time, but it's being recorded so you can just watch it again at a different time. But I will take some questions. If Katrina, I know it's sort of, you probably have been answering questions. I don't know if you've been answering along the way, but we can start taking questions. And if you feel good about where you're at, you don't have any more questions. I know many of you are trying to get ready to get dinner or get kids in bed. Please just hop off. I'm not going to be insulted if you leave. But before you leave, I just want to tell you, again, from a parent's perspective, this is the best decision my husband and I made for our children. It is a sacrifice, but we make it work and we make it affordable. Schools do everything they can to make this affordable for you. They want your children here. You would absolutely and truly appreciate an independent education. And I'm going to thank you on behalf of your children, because it's going to be many, many years before they actually thank you for the sacrifices that you're making to make this even a possibility. So thank you guys so much for those that have to hop off. So
Alyssa, thank you.
Can ask questions.
Thank you so much for this presentation, Alyssa. You shared so much information and in such a clear way with us all. There are a lot of really great questions coming in. I wanted to make sure to start with when someone asked earlier on, is my child is a US citizen and I'm on a visa with work permit. We've paid taxes and are considered residents for tax purposes. Do my children qualify? Can you speak a little bit about that, Alyssa?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. So the other lovely part about being independent is that independent schools are not like sort of bound by federal programs that would dictate who is eligible or not eligible for financial aid. And so I would say, depending on the school, you would reach out to the school if you're concerned that they don't offer, and they'll be explicit if they don't offer financial aid for families that are not US citizens, or, you know, they're for that purpose. But I would say, I mean, Katrina, you would probably know, I don't think there's any schools in Los Angeles that would not be a reason that you couldn't qualify for financial aid. In fact, there are certainly even families that are not documented. And we absolutely will help them. None of this information goes anywhere. It's not going to the government. None of this information. Again, we are independent of all of that. And so also, if people didn't want to ask the question, if you are not documented and you are, you know, you're kind of wanting to make this amazing choice for your children, don't fear telling us or filling out these forms. If you don't have those tax forms because you simply have not been able to use them, there are other ways that we can work with you, particularly if you're in one of those unique situations.
Alyssa, there's another question about additional fees. Someone writes that you spoke of additional fees, and does financial aid cover those, or is financial aid usually just covering tuition?
That's a really great question. And this is why I kind of talk about that, because not every school has the same ability to support families, but the core goals of a school, if you are a family that has high enough need that it will be a struggle for you to let your children have what I would call an experience of being at a school. And if that means the experience means that you also go to Mount Baldy, you also go on class trips, and there's these things, there is what's called supplemental support. And oftentimes schools have fairly limited, but they do have additional support that they can give to generally the highest need families, to be able to support them in, if they even needed support for calculators. Well, I don't know if anybody's using calculators anymore, but you know, if you needed to buy laptops, or they want families to have this, these children need the same core experience as those that are paying full price, and however we can kind of help accomplish that. So reaching out to the school, if you need supplemental support, is going to be part of that. But sort of initially, your grant awarded is basically about tuition first. And then as you get into some of those other things, the schools will reach out and let you know if you qualify for supplemental support.
Great. There's a couple questions that I'm going to put together here because I know we're really coming to the end of our time, but a couple questions have come in around advice for two-parent families where both are independent contractors, 1099, or artists, and income that varies a lot from year to year. How do you recommend calculating what we're able to afford? And someone says, do we just explain this, as Alyssa says, and overshare? Yes.
So my first answer is always going to be, the more you can tell me about who you are. So if you say, hey, I work with a lot of schools in Los Angeles, and actors are like a classic example of, I was on a show and I was building, I was on this show and now the show's been canceled, and it could be 6 or 8 months before I get on another show, or I do commercials and that's inconsistent work, or what have you. My best recommendation is this. If you are an independent contractor and you just have what's called a Schedule C, I would look at your tax returns from 2019, 2020, and then where you are at sort of at this point in 2021, and take an average. Because if your income really does shift and kind of ebb and flow in such a way, at least for your estimates, maybe taking a couple of years averages, but then being super clear in your form saying, I'm giving you an average of the last 3 years, and let me know if you want to look at my 2019 taxes, or let me know so I can show you that while 2021 looked great, 2020 was awful, and so was 2019. So that absolutely is the case. And then oftentimes schools might even reach out to you and ask for some of those additional documentations to really help you, because they're also wanting to use averages, particularly if your income is inconsistent.
Thank you. There's a question asking about how to handle a situation with a non-present parent. Will they still need to submit income information if they're not involved at all in caring for the child?
So here's dealing with our children and our finances, and I would adding and dealing with ex-spouses. So those are pretty complicated situations. So the rule is generally that both biological parents need to complete the application. However, there could be more than one reason. So if you have a child that's looking to go to a faith-based school and the ex-spouse has absolutely no interest in even wanting the child to go to that school, they may just decide what we would call non-compliant, or just not someone that's willing to participate. And so the schools have discretion around this. But what I would do is, if you have this situation, this is something you need to immediately address with the schools you're considering, because not everybody has the same process. Some schools may say, well, we need you to fill out this form called a Parent B waiver that says the rationale for why I can't get Parent B to do the thing is because of insert your reason. Some schools might ask for a divorce decree that says, oh, the Parent B actually has no stake in the situation, and or you have sole custody, or Parent B is in jail, or we just never knew him, or we didn't actually ever have a Parent B. There was actually no Parent B. I did this on my own. There is many reasons why we would be able to waive the requirement for Parent B, but this is absolutely one of those situations that you can't just call SSS and say, what do I do? They're going to say, call the schools or reach out to the schools you're considering, and they'll give you guidance on how to complete it.
Thank you. Maybe last question here is a really nuts and bolts question, or we have two nuts and bolts questions. One is, how do we submit the tax forms, and from what years?
So I'll answer the second one first. So remember I said your matrix, right? You were supposed to see what schools you're considering, what documents are required of that school, and when do they want them submitted by. So that's your homework assignment. Figure out what schools you're looking at, what documents are required. They are going to tell you what tax year they need and when they need it. The most common thing is that they're going to immediately ask for your 2020 taxes, which everybody at this point should have for the most part. Nobody would have a reason not to have your 2020 taxes. And then most of them would require your 2021 taxes, if not right away, but at some point in the future. And so doing that, research to find out what they want, do that for all your schools. Now, how do you get them to the organizations? All of the platforms that are out there are online platforms. And as long as the documents are in, you could even take a picture of your W-2 from your cell phone. As long as they're in good working condition, you can upload photos, you can upload PDFs of your documentation. If you don't have access to, if you don't have access to the details, if you don't have a scanner at home, or you don't have an ability to do that, or it's challenging for you to work on a computer, you can go to a local library. They have scanning opportunities there that are usually either free or reduced. I know with COVID, all this is a little bit more challenging, but and then most systems will still allow you to mail tax documents. So if you are really I can't figure this thing out, you can they'll have the address of where you can mail the tax documents, and then they will upload them for you. But you can typically just upload them into the platform that you're working in.
Great, thank you. Someone asked about credit card debt. Do they enter? I think they're wondering if they just put monthly credit card charges, if they list those, if they're paying them off every month, or if they should just omit those.
So it depends on the platform, because some of the platforms ask for annual. That's a really important point. Pay attention, because sometimes it's an annual question and sometimes it's a monthly question. If it's a monthly question and the question is, what is your monthly credit card debt? And if it varies, over the course of a year, just remember we're doing your budgeting, right? So in your budget, this is why I tell you to do the budgeting, because you will see kind of our average credit card debt covers between, this and this, or our average monthly credit card payments are this and this. We're not looking for exact numbers as of that moment. So we're just looking for averages there. I would put it in there if you have credit card debt and what you're paying towards it. It doesn't, nobody's going to judge you for having credit. Like that's not sort of like a judgy situation. It's just, what are your expenses? What are we looking at? The same would apply for what you have in the bank. What I have on the first of the month in my bank account and what I have at the end of the month can vary pretty wildly after all of our expenses have come out. So they're really just looking for averages on all of those things: credit card debt, student loan debt, all that kind of stuff.
Thank you, Alisa. I apologize because I know there are more and more questions that are really meaty, wonderful questions coming in. And unfortunately, our time is coming to an end. I want to really encourage you with those questions. Reach out, ask schools the questions. You can call school financial aid offices. And as Alisa said, you can also call for a lot of these questions about, should I include this? Where should I include this? Where do I find this information? You can call the financial aid services as well, and they'll be able to help you.
Yep.
There were many questions asking about how to access a copy of the recording or to look at slides again. And the recording will be on the LAIS website towards
probably tomorrow. I mean, I can get it to you
you're
guys.
fast, Alisa.
Yeah, it renders pretty
Yes.
quickly. I'll get it to you certainly within a couple of days. They should be able to access it.
So you'll be able to look at that over the coming month as you're working on your financial aid, at your financial aid applications. Again, on behalf of LAIS, we're just so glad that you all are considering independent schools in Los Angeles. We're so glad that you're taking the time and energy and thought to apply for financial aid too. The schools are all here for you with any questions. And I want to extend a huge thanks to Alisa for your time here tonight. You've taught us all a lot, I think.
Awesome. Thank you
Thank
guys
you.
so much. Have a wonderful break, hopefully soon with the holiday season. Bye now.